part two of my Match the Hatch kind of series, if you will. I have these independent series that I'm kind of putting together on my page and on my channel. And so this is one of those. And really what it's about is it's about speed and profile and understanding how the two interplay when you're selecting baits and when you're targeting bass specifically tailored to the Central Texas region. And so yesterday I put out a video on being the crayfish, the technical term, the crayfish, being the crawfish, being the crawdad, whatever. Today it's being the bluegill. And so what types of baits do I throw? Where in the water column am I focused? And how and when to employ techniques, how it goes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk as much as I can for 15 minutes on being the bluegill. So the first question, I guess, that I'm going to address is, what baits do I use when I'm being the bluegill? One of them is the spinnerbait. One of them is, at this point in my fishing career, a lizard, believe it or not. One of them is a crankbait. One of them is a swim bait. Spinnerbait, lizard, crankbait, and within that there's like you can go, lipless. You can go with the, one with a bill on it that dies. You can do a Topwater. It's another one. And so I'm just going to kind of talk about the different applications and what I'm thinking about in being a bluegill. So the spinnerbait, one of the things I want to clarify is there's a lot of talk generally on matching the size of the blade to the size of the forage that's in the water. I think there's ultimately an almost more important emphasis in certain situations to think more about the level of pressure that is placed on the water next to the blade when it's rotating in the water column. So if I can manipulate the style of blade, be it a Colorado blade, like a big round style blade, an Indiana, which is more of a teardrop shaped blade, a willow leaf. Each one has a different imprint it puts on the water and can signify in a way what the size of the mimic prey species that you're trying to put off in the water. So especially in a situation where they're not, what I will say is that when you're moving a spinnerbait, generally you're making deflections with cover, and the blades are not, you can't visualize the blades in stillness in an independent way to identify as a fish, oh, that's a 2-inch or 3-inch shad. I don't think it works that way. I think there's a subtlety all the way up on a sliding scale to a more prominent signature or pressure that's placed into the water next to the blades to mimic a certain prey. So if you have something that puts off less pressure, maybe it's the smaller fish in the water. Put off something that's more pressure and more movement, maybe it's a bigger fish in the water. So I'm thinking more about the thump of that blade. But the spinnerbait, I'm going to match the color. You can do a lot with the spinnerbait. You can bring it down the water column and slow roll it, close to the bottom. You can bring it up in the water column. You can burn it on the surface, or get it to where you're I forget if they call it bubbling the surface or something to that effect, where the blade is just kind of spitting periodically at the top of the water, and kind of churning the top of the water as you're pulling it through. Um, and then you can just do a steady retrieve in the middle of the water column and kind of give it, uh, intermittent jerks to try to make the blades flare out. So the spinnerbait, the lizard. What I think is special about the lizard, and really it's extraordinary. It was one of the major breakthroughs that I had in fishing so far in my young life. Was flipping the lizard in a condition where the visibility was low and utilizing the movement of all the appendages on the fall when you flip the lizard to create an imprint in the water that is similar to the way that fins fan out on a bluegill, or that type of situation. You always see the bluegill swimming and it's kind of flaring out, it's moving, there's its tail and all the different fins. And so I'm trying to mimic that with on the fall with the appendages of the lizard. That is unbelievable. So in a situation where you got low visibility, I might go to like a chartreuse pumpkin color, pumpkin chartreuse, and mimic, the colors in the bluegill family, uh, in creating that signature as the bait's descending. So remember that, the lizard. And the next one, the crankbait, I can do a lipless crankbait, like a rattle trap. I can do a square bill crankbait. I can do your typical build diving crankbait, the dive 2, like a DT 6, or all these different increments of depth. I can manipulate that bill size to do different things, or remove the bill as stated. But the main thing is I'm searching for profiles within those crankbaits that suit the anatomical, uh, the way that the bluegill is built with relation to other, like a thread fin or something like that. It has a higher arch at the midsection of its back and has a mirrored shape on the underside. So it's kind of like a radius, like a more of an oval shape. Whereas with a thread fin, it's elongated a bit more. There is still a noticeable arch on it, but it's not as much of a round profile. And then you start looking at the flatness of the bait versus the width. There's so many things that you can evaluate in terms of the actual construction of the plastic lure that mimic the profile of what that bait fish looks like. So if I want to be a bluegill, I want to survey the bluegill and understand how they look at the different stages in their life, and mimic that with the selection of my crankbait. The next one, so we're at 9 minutes. The next one is the swim bait. This can be a glide bait, like a hard type swim bait. It can be a soft plastic swim bait. But the main thing there, again, is I am seeking out profiles that are in line with the natural shape of what a bluegill represents. There's a lot of swim baits that I've seen on the market that are very elongated. And yes, I could change the color to look like a bluegill looks, especially with a swim bait, which is more often than not a clear water technique where the bass is visual to examine the bait coming through the water. I really want to try to mimic as closely as possible to what they really look like. The crankbaits you're throwing in, to take a step back and mention the crankbaits once again, you're throwing the bait and you're moving it a lot quicker generally through the water. There might not be as much visibility. in certain situations, um, whereas the swim bait is a lot more natural and there's a tendency to swim it slower, although there may be times when you burn it. But from what I have seen, it's a lot more visible. The fish has more time to take a close look at the bait and survey it. You see a lot of times with swim baits, fish follow the bait. I have seen it a ton, and they are inspecting it. So what we do to combat that is throw it in low light conditions, throw it in windy conditions, break it up by throwing it in a forest of stumps or something to break up the profile of that bait and not let them get a good look at it in clear water. The next one is the topwater. You can throw little poppers, which is one of my favorite things to throw. Because if you watch bluegill in their natural environment, a lot of times they come up and they kind of pop and peck at the water surface. It's not exactly analogous to how the action is on a spitting topwater, like a pop bar, but it's close. And the rings that it puts off in the water after you pause, after twitching the line, are similar to the rings that you see that are resultant from schooling, schooling bluegill near the surface that are kind of swimming around, feeding on bugs and doing different behaviors like that. So you want to select topwaters with the same thought process. I'm sure there's a lot of topwaters that you can use. There's buzz baits, there's cigar style walking baits, there's whopper plopper style baits with the propeller on the back. There's all these baits, but for me, my key baits when I'm trying to be a bluegill I'm going to start with a popper. And so that's kind of a short but really concise evaluation and summary of how I'm thinking. And I'm always rehearsing this and trying to refine this in order to be stronger in my approach and outwit my competitors. And so what I mean by that is when I go fishing, the fish has a small brain. It is only as smart as the information we feed it. If we catch a fish and take it out of the population, we're removing its ability to learn from a negative experience. If we instead reintroduce it to the population, that fish now may potentially become harder to catch. And so if we've got a bunch of anglers who are practicing catch and release every day, then we're only as good. The fish is only as knowledgeable and we're only as good as what our competition is. And so if we're being smarter than our other anglers and thinking about finer details, that puts us towards the top and makes a very difficult curve for the fish to key in on and distinguish what's fake from real. And so I'm going to leave you on that. I hope that was good information. I'm going to continue to put out absolute fire content, and hopefully this gets you excited to go out and catch some fish. Thank you so much. We'll see you.